This is the Devil Wears Prada, the novel before the movie came out. And it's a really good sort of like quick pleasure read. You can kind of see it's not very thick. It's a pretty light paperback version anyway. The Devil Wears Prada is a book written by Lauren Weisberger and published in 2003. Weisberger says the story was partial fiction and partial first job experiences of her and her friends. This book was turned into a movie in 2006 starring Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, and Emily Blunt. Parts of the book remind me of my time interning at Elle Magazine. Andy's tasks as an assistant overlap with some of the things I did as an intern. There was some hierarchical culture, but my experience wasn't nearly as negative or dramatic as the book's storyline and tone. I had a great time interning at Elle and learned a lot. It was my one and only experience in fashion media, as I've worked my whole career as a fashion designer, which has a very different culture than fashion media. There were certain unspoken expectations, like you should be dressed in the latest fashions and wear at least some designer brands if you wanted to fit in. And there was a sense of deep respect for the creative vision of the higher-ups that ran the magazine. In The Devil Wears Prada, Andy clearly feels out of place in fashion media. The fashion industry does sometimes have a way of making you feel out of place even if you've been in the industry for a while. And this isn't even just fashion media. I've felt this way at fashion industry events and on numerous fashion design interviews. I've been on interviews where they looked particularly disappointed with what I wore to the interview, which I believe had a big influence in my not getting a job. But that's fashion. The fashion industry definitely has its own sort of interview outfit culture that's different from mainstream corporate America. There's a certain ideal interview style, a balance of quality, professionalism, and edge, which I'm sure I hadn't mastered in my younger interviewing days, and I'll admit that. It seems shallow, but a big part of the fashion industry is clothes. In the book, Andy gets the job offer on a Friday morning, and the HR person wants her to start on Monday morning, 3 days later. This is typical in the fashion industry. In my experience, when hiring, a company usually wants you to start right away. Since I've only worked in the fashion industry, I thought this was typical everywhere. Apparently it's not. There are other industries like tech where from getting the job offer, you can start anywhere from 1 to 6 months later, which gives you time to quit your current job, end on good terms, and accommodate them if they need you for longer to train your replacement. Plus, you can potentially take a few months break in between jobs to rest and reset while still having the security of a job waiting for you. It would be amazing to have this in fashion, but I've never seen it. In the book, Andy hand-delivers designer clothes all over the city using a car service. This is really common at magazines. I went on many car service rides picking up garments from designers and dropping off other garments. The urgency for which garments need to be picked up and returned for events and photo shoots means a shipping service doesn't always work, and some garments are too expensive to leave in the hands of a shipping service, so many magazines prefer sending interns or assistants with a car service. I remember a time when I was interning for Elle that I was delivering and picking up an assortment of fur coats. By the time I got back to the office, I probably had 10 fur coats, each weighing at least 10 pounds. Those things are heavy, and I couldn't carry them all at the same time. The driver helped me carry them to the elevator, but then had to go. And when the elevator came, I started loading them in by myself, and the door closed with 3 or 4 fur coats inside, and me on the outside of the elevator on the first floor lobby. I almost had a heart attack as I furiously pressed the up arrow, and I watched the numbers above the elevator door go higher and higher, and I pictured the coats getting further and further away from me, and watching slowly as the numbers came back down, hoping and praying that those coats would still be in the elevator when it arrived back on 1. It was probably the longest 2 minutes of my life. To my relief, they were still on the elevator floor, plus 6 people that worked in the building coming down for lunch, looking confused as to why fur coats were taking the elevator all by themselves. That was so stressful. Nina Garcia at the time was the fashion director of Elle Magazine. Once when Nina was about to come into the office, we were told by someone not to look her in the eye, and I thought this was kind of silly, but I understand this was probably just one person's idea of showing respect. Josie was Elle's creative director while I was there, and I sometimes got his mail for him, and I was told to just put his mail on his desk and not to talk to him. But I remember one time he ended up speaking to me and showing me his most recent styled photo shoot in the latest edition of Elle, and he was always very friendly, but I was so worried that I was going to get in trouble, even though he started the conversation with me. But it was nice. We talked about this Chanel penguin sweater in a photo shoot, and we were talking about how cute and playful it was. I had a great time at Elle, and like anywhere, there were tight deadlines and some stressful situations, but people were always nice and very reasonable. At the end of the day, The Devil Wears Prada is a fictional book, and in my experience paints a dramatized picture of the fashion industry. I like this book, but it's definitely not a pleasure read for me. When you work in fashion, you don't want your leisure time to involve fashion. It's similar to watching Project Runway. It's not enjoyable for me, not because it's not a good show, but because it's the industry that I work in every day. If you're new to the fashion industry or you are not involved in the fashion industry, I can see this being an enjoyable read. Did you read The Devil Wears Prada or watch the movie? What did you think of it? And let me know below.